Sounds like we're going to start with my dog barking in the background. Hey everyone, welcome back to Be Not Afraid. This is episode 4 of Dismantling Ethnic Studies. And today we thought that we would talk about some of the main players, some of the writers of the curriculum, some of the founding voices that are inspiring, where their kind of allegiances lie, and also what that looks like. I really wanted to focus on having Julie start us off because Julie has a very extensive understanding of Marxism, and there's no getting around it. Two things that you're going to hear here, and that I'll even play a part of a video from, are that critical race theory is coming to elementary schools. Critical race theory is coming to junior high schools, and critical race theory in full name is coming to high schools. They're not going to hide it anymore. It comes, for Utah, it comes in 2024. For California, it's right around the corner. So Julie, go ahead and, if you would, just delve deeper into what you saw coming from Russia.
Yeah, I lived in Russia in the late 90s, and then I came back to the States and I got a dual master's in Russian and East European studies and Russian language and literature. And obviously got to learn a lot about what communism did. First of all, I experienced the aftermath of communism living in post-Soviet Russia for a year and a half, and then studied the Soviet history and Soviet dissident literature in depth, wrote my master's thesis on an aspect of Soviet history. And then just finished a book a year and a half ago, where I talk about some of the same tactics that the Soviets used to overtake culture happening in America. And that includes the overtake of education. And so can become very confusing. And to be honest, all of this can be very confusing. And kind of that seems like it's on purpose, because most of us here in America, unless we're like in a lot older generation, we've lived in, what seemingly a time of peace our whole lives. And if we've been around good people most of our life, we can have the belief that most people are good, and probably most people are. But the truth is that anytime, well, just look at the 20th century alone and look at the totalitarian regimes that popped up. And, these controlling regimes attract the worst in humanity, the psychopaths, the narcissists, and all of that. And so we have to kind of get it out of our mind that everyone has good intentions, because we have good intentions. And most of the people that we've been around in our lifetimes have had good intentions, because that's not the case. All throughout the history of the world, there are people, seeking power, getting in power, and they do untold damage on populaces. So really quick, what is Marxism? Karl Marx was a German philosopher, 19th century Germany, and he wrote the Communist Manifesto. And Marxism is really, this is my terminology, because you can start getting into all of this vocabulary, and I just want to boil it down to its essence. Marxism is a playbook that has been adapted in many different ways and very successfully to prepare a society to fall to communism. What is communism? Again, my definition, simple, boiling it down, it's the implementation of socialism through force, through violence. We will force you to have an equitable society. We're going to forcibly redistribute wealth. We're going to forcibly redistribute resources. If you don't like it, we're probably going to kill you. That's why communism is the deadliest form of government in the world's history. It doesn't just kill people who are enemies, it kills people who might become eventually disenchanted with it. It's a very brutal, 100 million deaths in the 20th century alone, that's estimated. And that's of countries killing their own people. That's not talking about like any kind of wars. So we should want nothing to do with communism. Communism is a collectivist system where there's no individual rights. It's kind of the opposite of what we were supposed to have here in America with our republic form of government, where individual rights are the foundation. In a communist society, you don't have individual rights. It's all about what's best for the collective. And in fact, in communism and Marxism, which is the playbook to get a society to fall to communism, it's a very strong belief that you can use any means necessary in order to obtain the objective. That you can kill anyone, you can denigrate anyone, you can imprison anyone. It doesn't matter. Humans are like cockroaches in terms of the value of their lives in the minds of Marxists and communists. Now, we think of Marxism and some of us think, oh, it has to do with economics. No, it's a playbook of oppressed versus oppressor. And the really crafty part of Marxism that gets so many people to fall for it is that part of it is based in truth. And we look at Russia, the first society that went, that fell to communism. It was a highly stratified society where there was the vast majority, 80%, were peasants. They had been serfs just decades before. So basically almost slaves, little more than slaves for centuries in Tsarist Russia. Then you had the very small elite, little tiny middle class, but a very highly stratified society. The way I like to illustrate it is you had peasants living in like mud huts with their cows and goats and chickens living in there with them in the winter. So there would be like animal excrement on the floor. That's where they lived. Then you have like the Tsars, you have them dining on caviar, going to the ballet, having a very high level, like the highest upper crust European life you could have, palaces and everything. So yes, there was deep inequality in Russia. And yes, something needed to be done about it because it was not okay. So what Marxism does is it identifies a group of people who are either oppressed or can be made to feel oppressed. And it focuses on grievance. We're gonna focus on stoking you to anger, to violence, to tear down the systems of power. And once they tear down the systems of power, then the communists come, fill the vacuum, set up their totalitarian regime. And what's the end result? Oh, impoverishment, enslavement, and death is the result of a communist regime. So, there might be some people who end up with a better deal under communism than they did before, but probably not. And the majority of people suffer greatly and don't have individual rights. And there's purges, vast quantities of people sent to their death, even people who are loyal to the regime. We've seen this repeat itself over and over and over again, all throughout different societies, large swaths of Latin America, Asia, China. And the craftiest, so the Marxists back in like the 1920s, 1930s, they were getting frustrated that Western society didn't seem to be falling to communism. America didn't seem to be, they really were not making great inroads in America. They weren't making great inroads, in Great Britain, Germany, Western society. So they kind of had to reframe Marxism, and they took on cultural Marxism, which was infiltrating key institutions from within, one of them being education, the others, the church, the family, the legal system, and also media. Those key institutions had to be infiltrated from within. They took a very long game over many, many, many decades to slowly erode those bulwark institutions that were preventing the West from falling to communism. So there's that. And then we have, oppressed versus oppressor. Let's take a quick look at Latin America. They took on liberation theology, where the Catholic priests were radicalized, some of them, and within the Catholic Church, they radicalized the peasantry to go after the landlords. And of course, there was deep inequality in Latin America. I mean, the truth is, oppression is one of the major themes of world history. There's no denying that. But Marxism boils it down to only looking at oppressed versus oppressor. And again, it's using grievance and anger and envy and violence.
So how do they play that out in our schools? We know how it looks in colleges. We've seen that, but how does it look for the younger kids?
So we have the development of critical theory, which spread rampantly through first universities, and then critical race theory. And so with critical race theory, it's people of color who are the oppressed, which in some cases that has been very true, obviously. And then white people, whiteness, white supremacy, systemic racism is the oppressor class. And so you're getting people to tear down that system. Queer theory and gender theory. With queer gender theory, it's the binary genders is the oppressor class, or just it's oppressive just in general, promoting binary genders. With queer theory, heteronormativity is the oppressor. And they've been playing around with this now for decades, found it very effective. And of course, the younger you start teaching older, let's say college age people, these theories, and yeah, you'll get some of them, but to be most effective, and of course, communists know this, you've got to get to the children, because the children will believe whatever you teach them. And so now to have, through these ethnic studies, to be promoting the critical race theory now from kindergarten and up. And they don't just, it's not just critical race theory, looking at this California thing, they throw in a little bit of queer and gender theory in there as well, just for good measure. But what it looks like is teaching children that everything, the whole of society is all based on power dynamics. And how do you know if you have power? If you're white, male, heterosexual, cisgender, Christian, middle class, all of those things. And there is some truth to that. There is some truth to it. How do you know if you're a victim? Well, you're a person of color, you're homosexual, or whatever the case may be. And so they have the kids examine themselves and their power. And for those kids who have power, because this social power is actually a form of, it's a resource and it's a form of capital. And so you have to allocate your power to other groups if you're part of a group that historically has been more powerful.
There is some truth to that, because one of the wealthiest groups in America are New Americans from Nigeria, very dark-skinned people. So, or how about Indians who come here and work for software companies? They're doing very well. There's a lot of people who are doing very well who aren't white. And there are a lot of white people who are suffering, who have very, very little, who are generations of factory workers, and that's as good as it gets. So where is the truth in teaching kids that they're being white is powerful? Because
it's not completely true. And of course, it's designed to tear apart, and it's designed to get the children who are non-white to be angry and to want theirs. I want mine, I deserve reparations, or I deserve whatever, give me the power. And for the white kids to sit down and shut up, and you can become an ally, and you can also tear down your systemic racism and become radicalized and go out in the streets and tear down statues of, Thomas Jefferson, because he's a symbol of whiteness and he had slaves, so he's automatically 100% evil. It's taking these partial truths and then hyper focusing, throw in the anger and the grievance, and a measure of self-righteousness. And it really does act like a religion. Again, if you get to the kids and you can indoctrinate them, you can really wreak havoc. You throw in the gender and queer theory, and it also is very, very highly damaging to the family structure and religion that, don't support all of that as much. And you have a group of angry, disaffected youth who feel righteous and destroying society, and then the communist totalitarian regime can come in and take hold.
Know that people are going to push back on the religion comment, and they're going to say no, they would never. But is it true that if you go to other countries, whether it's Russia or whether it's China, that they may have churches that look like they're religious on the outside, but inside they follow very strict state guidelines?
Well, I wrote my master's thesis on underground Christian movements in the Soviet Union. And of course, I studied the registered churches as well. The registered churches had to sell their souls in order to be able to have legal right to continue worship. They weren't allowed to baptize their children. They were not allowed to teach their children to pray. All of the sermons had to be state approved. The churches were all infiltrated with KGB agents. in many cases led by KGB agents. The Orthodox Church particularly was, all of the people that rose in the ranks were all KGB agents, who rose in the ranks in the clergy. So that was very much true. Whereas
Well, I feel like being here in Utah, a lot of people will say that, oh no, Utah is pretty much fortified because we're known for a predominant religion here, the LDS religion. But it seems to me that they will have to water it down in order for it to be accepted under Marxism.
Which
So
they were you referring to?
what I mean is, we've seen that wheel, the wheel that has like the Christian faith, cisgender, all of these things are showing. So they're going to teach in our schools that religion is problematic. That is part of what they're going to teach. And people would say it would never happen in Utah because Utah is predominantly a faith-based state.
But that's already shifted so much. The younger generations are already, there's a lot of disaffection with the LDS church or just church in general. In Salt Lake City in particular, I did live there for 8 or 9 years. It's getting more and more rabidly anti-LDS, anti-religion.
So they will be able to push that you believe that they'll be able to push that, or do you think that parents will push back? Brooke, do you have any thoughts?
I think a lot of parents will push back. Go ahead, Brooke.
Oh, I was just thinking, I've been kind of caught on the thought that Julie said that there is some truth to that, that there is some power. And so I remember when I got divorced from my first husband, I wrote an essay called "The White Male BYU Elitist RM." and basically the premise was that in the sphere in which I ran at the time, there was no possibility for him to empathize with a position of no power, because that was the ultimate position of power. And I was just like, you can't understand how it felt for what I went through, because you've never suffered, you've always been at the top. So when you say there is this power, like I felt it so keenly. I was so aware that my perspective was not that. It was not at the top. And even though people would be like, well, why do you think that, you just were female instead of male? That was the only part of the circle where you didn't have power. And so as I was listening to you, Julie, to have people buy into this, I was like, how do you reconcile that bit of truth that you feel, that you experience, and what do you do with it in order to say, hey, maybe this isn't going to work out, maybe this solution isn't going to work out? And I can only speak from my experience. I don't know where other people can find it. Now, obviously, we have history of how communism and forced equality results in murder, right? So you can either learn from history or you can keep recreating it. But when you experience it personally, it can create, that inequity can create such rage, and like, you have to understand what there's no way you can, because you've only experienced power. And so for me, the separation of religion from this, because for me, I found it in religion, like Christ is the great equalizer, because he can understand me. That's what happened. I know this isn't about religion, but the opposition of communism towards religion, when religion has the solution for those injustices and that unfairness that we feel in our lives. And of course, they have to take that out of the picture so they can justify all of the atrocities they commit in the name of rectifying this deep sorrow that people feel because they can't be understood or heard or be justly dealt with, because life is not fair. And everyone experiences that in some way, even the white male BYU elitist RM. He might be short, or he might be, there's something that people are going to say or speak with a stutter, or, everybody has something. And for us to disqualify others by labels and saying, you are a white male BYU elitist RM, and therefore you can't understand me. Even my perception of that, of my ex-husband, thinking I knew him well, I also knew the places where he did feel weak and inadequate. And so I didn't justify that. I didn't give that any empathy, for the human experience, and to find the humanity in all of us that truly unites us. So, for me, it was finding Christ as he understood me, and he can make up the difference, and not making my ex-husband responsible for making it up to me, right? So I could let go of that and let go of the need for retribution because of my belief in that. But if I didn't believe in that, then you can also find shared humanity in all of our frailties, because we all have them. And so
I think that that's how they grab these. Because I've been wondering, how in the world do you get parents or teachers, compassionate teachers, to grab onto these ideas? And I think that the reason that they grab onto these ideas is because they're looking for a shared humanity. They're looking for empathy. They believe that this is simply empathy, and it is simply having a voice. What they're missing is that over and over and over again, we hear that the object is to let some people have a voice and not let others. It literally is silencing others. So it is not that all healing thing that we tend to want to believe it is. I literally read a line in it that talked about humanity, and it said, humanity is restoring the humanity of people of color who have been dehumanized. And then the other part of this double helix is the critical. So all people need to think and see things through a critical lens, and see all of the places in which they have been hurt, they have been harmed, and they need to push all of that into the kind of process of accepting what's coming. But the only people that are centered around are the minority voices. That's literally what's in the curriculum.
Yeah, Marxism really, and you guys have both expressed this, Marxism latches onto people's traumas, and there is legitimate trauma that people of color have experienced, both individually and ancestrally. And my personal belief is that the unhealed wounds of our ancestors can be expressed in us individually.
yes.
Unhealed wounds of women, unhealed wounds of people, LGBTQ people. Yes, that's all real. But Marxism weaponizes those wounds, whereas Judeo-Christian ethics, particularly a personal relationship with Jesus, can actually heal those traumas. And of course, we still want to improve society for people who have, perhaps been underprivileged. But that's why it's so crafty, because there's so very many people walking around with these traumas, and they don't, they're being used. Their trauma is being weaponized against them and against society.
And that actually makes a lot of sense in why Utah is so susceptible to it. I mean, I was just listening to a James Lindsay presentation, and he said that Utah is the fakest red state. And that's a wake-up call, people.
I disagree.
Do you?
I do, because he said our politicians, and just coming from California where we couldn't make headway, and I have just seen the contrast. I would meet with people like secretly in the Sacramento Capitol, and we'd stop when the tour came in, and not secretly, but we would meet with legislators and their aides to try and figure out what we can do on certain problems. And then and we couldn't make headway, and the fact that in some areas we are in Utah, I would just like to, and in some ways, whatever he's referring to, he's not speaking expansively, in my opinion, because we have made model legislation, particularly on sensitive materials, and also girls' sports. And California would never do that. So I get what he's saying. It's a fake red state because California's blue, and the comparison is what isn't
It's
working.
because most people move here expecting that this is going to be a safety and religious haven. And then you'd find people who will not stand up for simple concepts like CRT is a raw deal. We shouldn't be touching it. And it would have been so easy to say Utah's not going to touch this because we believe that all people are created equal, period. That is something that could have happened, and it didn't happen because we are a progressive elitist state. Does that mean every person is? By no means.
Right.
But it does mean
I agree.
And I would say that the fighters that we have are fierce. We are kind of all Wonder Women. But that's not the same as the sleeping people who are letting their children be taken over by a progressive mindset.
We have a lot more opportunity to make good things happen if the people were to stand.
Yes.
So I believe that. And there are a lot of people who think everything's okay and they think I'm crazy. So
I think one reason Utah is particularly susceptible to critical theory. I did not grow up primarily in Utah, but my mom did. My mom is a Utah native. My mom was born in 1940. She did not see a Black person in person until she was like 18 years old. So she grew up in Cache County, Utah, a very homogeneous, community. But then she did go to college at Utah State, and I guess there were, some people of different races at that time. So she grew up very sheltered, and I think that there might be a lot of Native Utahns who they really don't, because Utah has been judged as being racist because there has been a little bit of exclusivity that Utahns have expressed where they don't really not super friendly to outsiders.
Like if we're super honest, there is stuff. There is stuff in the past that is pretty harmful, pretty hurtful. As a minority, I will say that there's stuff in the LDS religion that originally was very harmful. And because of that, I think that's why people are like trying to make amends.
Yes.
They're making amends the wrong way.
Yes,
exactly.
It's like, look, everybody. I love what Bob Woodson said when he was here, and he said, we don't want to be judged by the worst of what we've ever done. No one does. In our country, those were our birth pains. And Utah, that was your birth pains. But you don't turn around and go worse. And so I think that there is a rooted supremacy in progressivism. So I want to be very clear. I do not believe that every single person is that way. But in the progressive ideology, there is a rooted supremacy of we know more, we are more enlightened, and so it is our job to push that on your children. That is a supremacist attitude. It's not the supremacy of go work in the cotton field, but it is you couldn't possibly think or do for yourself, so we need to tell you how to think and do.
Yeah.
That's very concerning. And again, that is right in the curriculum that we're looking at. And
I want to share. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I want to share one more thing about Marxism before we go into the curriculum, because I feel like it's really important for people to understand, because they're like, but my kid's teacher is not communist. They're like, so how there's, I call it the pyramid. It's actually a pyramid of power of communism and how communism spreads. Half of it is J. Edgar Hoover's construct that he came up with. He was pulling communism out and rooting it out of our institutions way back in the day. And then I added a couple categories. So at the very tippy top, we have the money bags, whoever is funding the communist agendas. And it's really the top elite people. And they're not communists themselves, but they understand communism as a nice power structure to keep everyone else down so they can keep themselves on top. Then the next level down is avowed communists. These are like the real hardcore. And honestly, a lot of we're looking at these people that are putting together these ethnic study curricula, and some of them are literal avowed communists. Like the head of our library association right now, an avowed communist. But that's not most. It's that there's a small amount. But the fact that there's very heavy percentage of those avowed communists that are literally creating the curricula for our children, that should cause some alarm. Avowed communists, they love communism. They want communism. The next level down is the fellow travelers. And these are more of your socialists, your more democratic socialist progressives. They're not like, they don't want communism. They don't really think communism is what they want, but they agree with the avowed communists on a lot of agendas. And so they're fellow travelers. They go along with that because they're like, yes, we need this ethnic studies curriculum. Yes, we need, to check our power. Yes, I'm white fragility, whatever the case may be. There's a lot of commonality there, and that's a much bigger group, the fellow travelers. Then we have the biggest group of all, hugest group of all. It's the dupes. Another term has been useful idiots. And honestly, the vast majority of people who spread communism in America, and they're the most effective, are the dupes, because they do not understand that it's communist in any way, shape, or form. They think it's a good thing. And they come across as like they're just doing good, because in their mind, that's what it's doing. They're just trying to help the underprivileged. They're just trying to help society change. And again, good intentions, duped. And I take it down one level. I separate dupes into two categories. That's level one dupes, that as I call it. Level two dupes is even one level below that. And that's the people that don't want to be called racist, homophobic, and bigoted. And so they don't say anything. They don't speak up. And I have to say, so Brooke and Carrie and myself, and also Lisa, we're not scared about being called bigoted and racist and whatever. We know that we're not racist, and so we're not scared. But someone who maybe like in their inner mind might wonder, am I really a racist? They're not going to like say the type of stuff that we're willing to say. But the level two dupes just don't want to be called those names. And so they just roll with it. And they're like, well, maybe it's okay. I don't want to say anything. So we have to understand the majority of people spreading communism are not communists. And most of them do have good intentions, but it's still spreading communism. So
Well,
that's, I had to say.
and I think that's the perfect place to go into, and we won't get into that today. Sorry. But Kristen Slater is one that, while I'm watching, you can watch her videos on YouTube. You can watch what they say, and some of the things that she talks about are that critical race theory and ethnic studies need to go hand in hand. She openly says they need to go hand in hand. If you
And
don't,
tell us who she is again for people watching. Who is
sure, yes, Christine Slater is one of the main people who influence ethnic studies curriculum. So she is in California. She's out of Oregon. Okay, I'll briefly explain her. So she's out of Oregon. She grew up in Medford. I've been to Medford. It is very white. And she took a teaching job where she came to Seattle, where I'm from. And she noticed that the kids' eyes were glossing over, and she realized that she needed to teach them what they wanted to learn. Now, of course, she says that what they wanted to learn was women's lib. I don't know. I mean, who knows? But that's what she says. And it was the 70s, so maybe it was true. But my issue is that these people come in, and this is why I think that she's probably a dupe, because or a dupe. And I think they can progress though, Julie. Would you say that they can progress? Like they can start as a dupe, and then they start to go to a few more trainings, and they hear a little bit more, and they start moving up the ranks.
Yeah.
I don't think that any of them are past. I think that the top level of that they mostly get to is
fellow traveler.
Yeah, that fellow traveler. Or maybe even communists, but they don't get past the point of not believing communism. That's reserved for the elites. That's reserved for the people who fund our curriculum. And who don't live anything like they want the rest of us to live. The people who say you can't fly in a jet, but watch me fly to Davos in a private jet. That's who funds our curriculum. So anyways, she started off in special needs. And one of the things that I've noticed recently is that a lot of the people who really push this stuff are special needs instructors. And that's probably because they're the most, they've got the most empathy. They do more for people on a regular basis than I could do. I would walk into a room and be overwhelmed, and I would need to leave. So I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate that they want to be the helpers. But when they believe that they can help somebody more than a person can help themselves, that is when we get into a dangerous category of dependency. And that's where we stay. And that is my biggest issue with the whole critical, all of this nonsense, is that we are turning society into people who do not believe they are capable of doing for themselves. They must rely on their emotions. And because their emotions make them fragile or trigger them, that is why we need to turn to the government to take care of us, because we can't handle ourselves. How much mental health stuff do we see right at the Better Up, right? We see all of these things, mental health, then we see Prince Harry talking about mental health, and we see other celebrities. And you're like, why is everything constantly focused on mental health when it should be like, that's not true resilience? And that's the focus of our schools. And that is,
I mean, some of it, some talk of mental health stuff. I mean, that's been very helpful for to destigmatize it. And yes, it's a big problem for a lot of people, but yeah, but then it can be weaponized where you take it too far. And that's where is that line? It's very hard. There's like this gray area. It can be very hard to dissect.
well,
Very
that's why a lot of
confusing.
counselors are speaking up, because they said mental health used to be about, you would come and you would see us and you'd have a problem and we would try to help you heal. We aren't healing anymore. We're using that to make people weak. That's what's going on. That sums up ethnic studies. I'm feeling kind of terrible that we haven't touched anything in the curriculum this time, but sometimes you don't. Go ahead.
Well, I just went to a thing at the Capitol today, and just since we're talking about Marxism, I want to share what I got in one of the little pamphlets and what I heard some of the teachers review it. Can I share with it, just because this is
Absolutely.
teachers in the Utah system commenting on it? So whyiloveamerica.com gave out these little booklets for kids to learn about why I love America. And then there were comments on it from Utah teachers saying that they didn't like it because it whitewashed history and the patriot, I don't know, there were other comments. So I went through looking specifically for instances of that and how it could do it. But the problem is, and the only suggestion that I had was to include the Iroquois' Great Law of Peace as an influence in the system of in the Constitution being arranged. So that was my only suggestion. But to whitewash history is such a bizarre claim to me, because it's a racist claim to say that you can't include stories about the founders, even if they were the ones who were writing it, because they're white. And so it's like, well, if they created this, then you get to tell the story about those people who founded the nation, regardless of what their story is. Were they at the meeting? Okay, yeah, let's put them in. And then we have all the wonderful other stories that 1776 Unites brings in. And if you attend the thing at Bountiful, September 14th, 15th, and 16th, you can see the actors that my daughter and Carrie will portray of the African-American experiences that they'll be sharing. So there always are those stories of people from different origins coming in. And they say by telling the stories, you can't tell them because they're white. That's what I heard. I don't know what they intended, but this goes back to my terrible comment I made that made no sense. But page 1, it's Karl Marx, he said, and I'm going to share my screen really fast. Oops, you need to let me share my screen. I'll read it while you work on that. Okay. Okay, so he said, let me just make it bigger so everybody can see. If you can cut the people off from their history, oops, let me just move this, then they can be easily persuaded. And so the claim that history is whitewashed means that you're cutting people off from their history. You can't tell it because they're white. And this is accomplishing those means, in my opinion. And so we have to tell our history regardless of the skin colors of those people who created it. And I think that's the most important message, is why was it created, and what did they do and why? And then skin color is secondary, and you don't comment first on the history of our nation based upon the skin color of the people doing it. Now, of course, we always want other mirrors for children who want to see diversity, and what did my people do, like Atticus, Crispus Attucks. He was the first person killed in the Boston massacre. And so you can tell these stories to children and add them in, but it doesn't mean you cannot teach about the founders. And not teaching about the founders is very Marxist. So anyway, just had to add that because we were talking about Marxism.
Well, ethnic studies has worked hard to keep communism, stories of communism, out of the curriculum. And the reason they want those stories out, they say, is because it would be offensive and it could turn to Asian hate. But Marxism and communism are not only an Asian experience.
And yeah, and as you say that, because I was thinking, Gary, after you asked me to speak on, to give a synopsis of Marxism, and what is the number one thing we need as the antidote? It's stories of people who grew up in communist societies, because that's what we get from childhood in our schools about Nazism. And that's why every American has a knee-jerk negative reaction to the Holocaust, as we should, because of stories. Because you fall in love with Anne Frank, you relate to her, and you see what happened with what she went through in her family. You watch, there's so many movies that have expounded on the horrors, absolute horrors of the Holocaust. But we don't have that for communism, and that has absolutely been on purpose. And that's the antidote, is age appropriate stories that get more and more intense and graphic as the person gets older, because the truth, just like we have to know the ugly truth of the Holocaust, we have to understand the ugly truth of communism.
And that
story.
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand that it is Europe, it is Asia, and it is Africa that have all experienced, and even those that are currently
in Latin America,
that are all living under Marxism today. And when you talk to those people, which I have done many times on my channel, when you talk to those people, you hear them say, oh my gosh, this is what's coming to America. This is on our front doorsteps. And people who would never, ever get involved because they are afraid of the government, and I think that makes sense that they would be, they are, they're the ones screaming the loudest that this is here. So I think that that's really important that people understand, and that it is here. When we go back the next time, probably tomorrow, and delve into more of the curriculum, we'll show you some more examples. So
it's not just here. We're in the end stages of a full-on Marxist cultural revolution in America, and we're in a very precarious position. And we really need a mass awakening, and we are seeing the beginnings of a mass awakening. We need to continue to fan those flames, and we need to protect our children, and we need to teach our children about what communism is and what it does.
Well, two things, Julie. One, I want you to share your book and your project, but then the other thing is that just today, like if you doubt that we're being weaponized, that our kids are being weaponized, today, Joe Biden made a comment, and the comment was about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it's time to get loud. That was his comment. So they're absolutely using this, throwing this into our schools, and then saying anyone who gets in the way of this is a threat to Americans. So, and Julie, will you just finish off with telling them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I wrote a book, Beneath Sheep's Clothing, and then we're making it into a documentary, and hopefully we'll be able to have it out in very early 2024. And a big point of the documentary is to educate people, I would say teenagers and up, for my documentary, probably not appropriate for young children, but about what communism is and what it does, looking at how they overtook culture in the Soviet Union and how that's happening in America. and how it's been happening for a century. It's not like it's just started, it's again, we're in end stages, but if we protect our children and we fan the flames again of this mass awakening, I think there's a lot we can prevent a lot of these, horrific things from happening, but we really have to put a lot of effort into that.
And the effort can be really simple. I just want to show you what I'm doing with my kids is I'm reading A Night Divided, 2 chapters a night with my kids. And they'll ask me all of these questions. Mom, why are they doing this? Why do they have to get out there? And I'm like, it was really scary. They would kill you. They would do this. And to have them experience it through story, as Julie said, something as simple as reading these books. This is our 3rd book that we've read of Jennifer Nielsen's, but my kids are 10 and 11 if you're trying to figure out who to read it for. But it's really good to read out loud with them so you can answer the questions and add your life experience. And it just comes naturally. It's not something you need to sit them down and say, listen to this. You lay down in bed before, and it's very fun. I look forward to it every night. So it's not difficult, but it makes a huge difference.
Right. And as we're giving book reviews, I'm reading The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind with my son. And it talks a lot about when government is corrupt and makes it harder for communities to live in, how they still have resilience. And so for me, that's an important lesson.
What's it called?
The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind.
Okay.
So, and it's about Malawi, Africa. But it's just important that they have those basic lessons that they are not learning in school. In fact, tomorrow we'll share some of the curriculum that they are learning in school right now, and why parents should be concerned.
Okay.
Yes.
Just so people see what it is, so it'll get in their brain for the visual people.
Yeah, yes. I love having you on chat because I'm like, I just don't do the stuff. So you guys, thank you so much. I don't want to keep people over an hour, so I appreciate it, and we will see you next time.
Bye.